Good evening, everyone. Today is Thursday, January 22nd, 2026. And on behalf of the Kentucky Genealogical Society, thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar, The 1833 Cholera Epidemic in Lexington, Kentucky, with our guest speaker, Terry Foodie. I'm Kathy Kieser from Lexington, Kentucky. With me is Melissa Barker from Tennessee Ridge, Tennessee. We're your co-presidents. And Elizabeth Allen Pennybaker from Burlington, Vermont, and she is our vice president. The Society is an all-volunteer grassroots organization with members throughout the U.S. and half a dozen countries. Before Melissa introduces our speaker for tonight, let me remind you that if time allows, Terry will be answering questions at the end of her presentation. And to ask a question, if you look up on the bar on your screen, you will see what looks like a speech bubble with a question mark on it. And if you click on that, it will drop down a box that you can type in your question. You can do that anytime during Terry's presentation, as Elizabeth will be gathering those and moderating a Q&A at the end. Terry does not have a handout tonight. And with that, Melissa, you want to get us started?
Thank you, Kathy. I'm pleased to present to you Terry Foodie, RN, MSN, and she is a graduate of Niagara University in New York and University of Kentucky. A former public health nurse, university instructor, and research coordinator, she's authored 2 nonfiction history books. A Kentucky humanities speaker, Terry brings her extensive research, fascinating subjects, and personal perspective to audiences near and far. Take it away, Terry.
Hi, everybody. Tonight we're going to talk about the 1833 cholera epidemic in Lexington, some of the lessons for our global health today, and also focusing a little bit on the 3 heroes or 3 special heroes from that epidemic. So what is cholera? That's one of the first questions. It's an infectious, not a contagious disease, an infectious disease of the lining of the small intestine that causes copious amounts of discharge from the bowels as the fluid is pulled out of the tissues. People succumb to it in large numbers, especially in situations where they don't even realize they are getting infected with it. So what happens with cholera? We should look back to. I'm going to do a little vignette here. Pretend that I'm a person from that time period. And it's the spring of 1833, and people are starting to come out of their winterness. There's been so much rain, but we're still going to have a ball tonight. And I'm so excited. I have a new shawl that I got special and a new necklace. And I do hope that he's there and Mother doesn't notice that I'm spending too much time with him. But it will be such a gay and fun time. Be plenty of dancing, the punch bowl, and all sorts of good things to eat. So then I get home and I'm sitting on the edge of my bed and I don't feel so well. I hate to say this, but my stomach doesn't feel very good. It's very unsettled and I'm oh dear, I'm losing my whatever I ate in the chamber pot. So now I have to use the chamber. Excuse me. Stop. Oh, I think I might have to run outside to the necessary. Oh dear. Feeling so weak and my my eyes are starting to roll back in my head. My voice is getting real high like this. My hands are getting distracted and my legs are starting to get real tight too. And oh, they hurt. They hurt so desperately. And I keep losing myself and losing my bowel fluids. It just feels like I can't stop. And I have to lie back on the bed because I just I can't stay up any longer. I don't know what's happening to me. Mama, I don't know. But before the night is over, my pretty party garment becomes my shroud. So it's not really, was that? Yes, unfortunately, for some people, it was that quick, 24, 48 hours. And why, you ask me? Well, partially is Lexington has this karst underground with sinkholes and caverns. So what goes down flows sideways. The privies or the outhouses were very shallow, maybe only brick or mud around them. We're going to get a little graphic here, folks. I hope you've already had your supper. But they really did have houses all over town, probably 100 of them. And they were very shallow. And there was a creek, a stream nearby. And so they started overflowing. These little privies were overflowing into sinkholes. And if the creek flowed, it would scoop up the contents, dump it on the ground, go down the sinkholes, narrow caverns, shallow wells, 16 public pumps just in the downtown part, the main city part, 16 public pumps, not counting all the other pumps in private places. Then the chamber pumps it up, the maid pumps it up and puts it in the stew or your punch bowl. And colorless, odorless, tasteless, you drink it and it pulls the fluids out of your tissue. The eyes roll back in the head. There's no tissue left here, no what we call turgor, which is firmness of the skin. If you pull on your skin, it's supposed to bounce back. But if you lose all these fluids, then the the heart changes, doesn't have the fluid, it doesn't have the electrolytes that it needs to keep firing. And so these people die from cardiac arrest due to the dehydration, from the infestation of this microbacteria, this cholera bacteria that they didn't even know they were getting from somebody else. So it started in 1817, this first big epidemic that was in the 1800s, probably around Bangladesh in that area. They would have cholera epidemics episodically with religious pilgrimages. The British invaded India, then the British got cholera because they were in there. But it traveled across Europe, decimated St. Petersburg in Florida. And by the time it got to this town of Sunderland, which was on water, a port town in 1831, this was the official death. So here you have blue, shrunken hands from the circulation leaving the extremities and going around the heart and the brain. And the contractions were from loss of the electrolytes, very painful contractions. This is a terrible way to die because also the mind stays alert and knows what's happening. She also has blue feet here. I think if someone was African American, they would get more of a dusky color. A dusky color as they lost these fluids and electrolytes. So one of the things that happens with epidemics, and it happened with ours, with COVID, was that people denial. Nobody wants to have a dirty country or a dirty city, so they say there's really nothing there. They blame the doctors. But what happened was the graveyards are filling up. The deaths defy the denials, and that's a Terry Foodie expression. The deaths defy the denial. You can't deny it when you see people dying around you. This horrible loss of life. So what do they think caused it? Well, miasma, bad air, swampy stuff. I saw something recently that people were saying they needed to clean up towns better, and it would be better if we didn't have so much pollution in our towns. Well, that would help our breathing, but that's not what's making us sick with flu or anything like that. It's not my asthma. It's not my asthma. It's not bad air. It's actually bacteria. Poverty, intemperance, poor health habits, immorality, filth. And also, I hate to say this, but they were blaming the free blacks that they thought lived in hovels and, not the best of conditions. So there was also racism at, at, in the game too. Now, this was from a person who I actually got to meet her. She was working on her master's in sociology. These were early numbers. Lexington had more deaths than this before it was all over with. You notice Somerset. Why Somerset? Well, Somerset was on a river at that time, wasn't on a lake. Louisville was a lot lower, the numbers, than Lexington. I don't know if that's because they don't have as much karst, but it wasn't affected as much. New Orleans just wiped out. Probably came over on ships, and these port cities, New York City, I have some quotes in my book, and there's also in the bibliography that doctors put out a newsletter every other week, which was just fascinating. They couldn't get people to pay attention to them. They said charlatans were selling bizarre things that wouldn't work. I said, oh my gosh, did they use bleach? I don't know. And then Cincinnati and Philadelphia, also just some other cities. At that time in Lexington, 1833, you know, those of you who live around here know that it had this reputation as being almost like a very far forward Greek city. They're like the Athens of the West, healthful reputation. Transylvania, which was one of the first colleges west of the Allegheny, established in the 1700s, had a medical college. At that time, Transylvania's University, excuse me. And the town branch, which was a fork of the Elkhorn Stream, flowed through the main part of the city. The city was built on either side of it, and it was a source of water. As I already said about the public ponds, shallow karst, underground sinkholes. There's a picture of the town branch surfacing west of the city. Now, this is a famous map. It's done by a person named Lutz. I think it's around 1834. So for Lexingtonians, this is where the town branch started. The headwaters are where the peanut butter factory is. The Smucker's Jelly and Jif Peanut Butter Factory on Winchester Avenue is the area of the headwaters, and they know it. They know it's there. There's been building around it, but that's where the town branch starts, runs down Midland Avenue, goes under Vine Street. Water Street used to be a much bigger street and was open. People could see it. And then, where is my cursor? And then out towards Frankfurt, out to where Masterson Station Park is now. It actually goes under Alexandria Drive over in that area. So a couple of things I want to point out is at that time there was a marketplace down here right along Water Street, and also the city police. They had watchmen at the night on night shift and then during the day, and they were supposed to check out for any thievery, murders, or other problems. And then here's Main Street up here. On Mulberry is now limestone, and then you see Upper. So this was a. If you want to know any of what these are, send me an email, which will be my last slide, and I can let you know. So what do the doctors think was going on? Well, they had no idea because they hadn't seen this before. But there's a lot of writing about this is in the nervous system, it's in the circulatory system. They thought it was contagious. I read all these books about how it was dealt with over in Europe, quarantining, and some of it was really shocking, trying to prove to doctors that it really wasn't contagious. The farmers were so distraught because they couldn't get their crops to market. with the quarantines. There's such an economic factor in the way we as people in the world view a disease. You probably saw that in COVID. People didn't want to stay home. They did. They said, go downtown. New York City want to stay home. Businesses wanted to stay open, even if people were sick. We're doing mass burials in New York City, but people still wanted things to stay open because they don't want to have that economy go down. It wasn't until 1884 with the microscope that this bacteria was discovered. However, there were people before then that thought that maybe trying to replace fluids, even through IVs, would have something to do with it, even though they don't know what the cause was. Things that they did in Lexington at that time, it was denial, then a day of prayer, and spreading lime in the yards. This had happened in London. That was the whole idea of purifying the air. And as a result, they had lime all over the bottom of their skirts and probably tracked it in their houses. People fled to the countryside. They went to Keene Hotel, which has a sign in front of it. And Keene Hotel is in Jessamine County, I believe. Yes, that says that. I hope I got the right county. It's probably Woodford, but I think it's Jessamine. About miasma. There was no hospital. There was a lunatic asylum, which is what they called it. It's now Eastern State Hospital. But there was no place for care, isolation. There was no Board of Health for surveillance, which is so important to surveillance of cases or sanitary enforcements. Now, they did pass some ordinances from the Board of Health, but there was nobody to enact them. People were dying. There was nobody to do the surveillance. 3 of the physicians fell sick. 3 died. 1 was absent, didn't come back till cholera was over. Another one was running down the stairs for a case and fell and broke his leg or arm, whichever one you've heard. There's different ideas which one really happened. The treatment was by anecdote versus data, which means each physician would say, well, this is how I think you should treat the case. This is what's worked for me. If you don't have it written down and you don't have data and graphing and looking at reports, then you're just doing what you think is best. They used calomel as a purgative because they thought it was this poison on the stomach, which, as you would imagine, would make somebody even more dehydrated. Calomel is mercury. We don't use that anymore. But somebody said to me, I bet people got better if the doctor didn't come. But they did try to get them to respond, and some people did recover, but not all of them. This is one of the doctors from that time. He wrote extensively. He said, well, he's an old man. Well, he wasn't an old man in 1832. He was only in his, or 33, he was only in his 20s. And he used the calomel. He used the calomel. Now, here's a story about these 3 heroes from the cholera epidemic. Well, actually, this is just King Solomon and Aunt Charlotte, so it's only 2 of the heroes. It was written in 1891. I think James Allen was born in 1847 or 49, maybe 49. He died in 1925 in New York City. He left Lexington and didn't come back. But he wrote this story about King Solomon of Kentucky that was a person who was a street person who buried the dead. And 50 years after this man died, they put up a monument or put up a gravestone for him. And because James St. Allen wrote about him, he's become quite famous over the years. But I found out some things that are misconstrued conceptions about him. I wrote The Pie Seller, The Drunk, and the Lady. I thought I was going to write a textbook for the nurses at Niagara University, but I ended up writing about these 3 people. There's still a lot about cholera in there and the whole bibliography and everything and footnotes throughout. But I focused on them to try to straighten out some of the myths and misconceptions about them, and also to show how common people can rise up during a time of great trouble or disaster and come forward and have a contribution. And they can also do it when they're not very young or they've had a hard life or their mother dies in their home. So let's start with the pie seller. Aunt Charlotte was a person who was born into slavery. Spencer Cooper, who was also a friend of another person in Lexington, Benjamin Gratz, freed her in 1827. He got religion, and I found their proclamation of freedom from him in his records at the county courthouse. He got religion, and he said, to purge my conscience the purge of the guilt of slavery, that he was going to free her. So she started selling these goods that she had down on the marketplace. She had a house. She had a house on Water Street. Now, how do I know this? When they were raising money in 1908 to build a monument or have a gravestone for King Solomon, they said in a newspaper article that her house was behind the Graves Cox store on Main Street, directly behind it. So this is where the Graves Cox store was in 1907. In 1886, right here was a dwelling, and there was a couple other dwelling here at the time. But here we are in 1907, and this is restaurant, barbershop, saloon, and pool hall. There's a kitchen up here for this hotel. But Graves Cox had all this property on Main Street. Mulberry became limestone. South Upper is over here. For those of you who live in Lexington now, the sculptures of the suffragettes are right here on Vine Street. And over here, near where Aunt Charlotte would have lived, is Jeff Ruby's restaurant, the Marriott, and the residential residence inn. And I think of Aunt Charlotte giving food and shelter to King Solomon, and now this is what's in the place where she had lived. The Water Street, the town branch, here's the railroad, used to flow here, still does, but it's covered over, and the market and the police station were down here in 1833 and in 1886. They're gone by the time 1907 comes around, and the railroad is here at that time. Now, King Solomon, who I'll talk about in a second, was auctioned off as a homeless person, as an indentured servant, and Aunt Charlotte purchased him. So we had the African American woman owning a white man in 1833, Kentucky, which I think is pretty noteworthy in itself. She personified the corporate works of Murphy, feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless. Her modern legacy is that Charlotte Court, a housing project, was built and named after her. And there was a report from the Department of Urban Housing, I saw it was not around 1970 or so, and it said highs, cholera, and low-cost housing. And it tells the story of Aunt Charlotte, and said that she bridged the two continents of North America and Africa, and some nice things like that about her. So who was William King Solomon? Who was this King Solomon of Kentucky? He didn't always look like this. This painting was done around the time when he was 72, and he died in 1854, so that's around 1849, 1847, that time, by a person named Samuel Woodson Price, who was practicing, and he got Solomon to sit still, and he painted his portrait. It's at the Budley Bullock House in Lexington right now. I don't know where it's going to end up. Transylvania University owns that house. But it shows that he was not always a snappy dresser. He tried to be a snappy dresser, but his clothes would get old. And he did succumb to drink, but for his whole life, he was not a drunk. He had a successful business. I've heard him described as a ne'er-do-well, au contraire. This is what I found in the notes of the trustees and the council in Lexington. He was 58 years old when cholera hit. But over the years, the city paid him this much money to do his work of on city streets, digging graves, digging wells. He did a lot of work. He graded the part of Broadway Street that goes next to the Hyatt, that really steep hill from Main to Maxwell and High Street. He graded that. That's his gets credit for that. But just before they arrested him, they were still paying him. They were still paying him. This was in April and this was May, just before he got arrested. He was not always homeless. He had property on Upper and Pine Street from 1814 to 1830. So 2.5 years before he was arrested, he lost this property. He had only been homeless for about 2.5 years. I don't know if this is the original house or not. There's a person who lives there that thinks it is. It's the original shape of the lot, 50 feet here and 150 feet back there, and then something added on here. Where is this in Lexington? Target's in this place now. It used to be a mellow mushroom pizzeria across the place, but University of Kentucky is kind of growing up around there. And during the time of the Chicago Fair, this portrait was displayed in the Kentucky House. He was honored that much by the citizens of Kentucky all these years after his death in 1854 and 60 years after the cholera. So, how many people did die? Well, 502 out of a population of almost 7,000. That's 8%. And the Kentucky Reporter listed all of the deaths from all of June and July in this issue. Here's the link. You genealogists, you've got to see this. When I discovered this, it's amazing and it's so touching to read all their names listed by where they live, occupations or trades, who they were related to. Lonnie, who was this Irish person that had a public bath down. His mother and his wife both died. The freed slave, the not the freed slaves, the ones who are currently enslaved are listed with their names and their owners. They're called servants at that time. The lunatic asylum lost 34 people. They're listed by counties or state because some of them came from as far away as Alabama. Then there's the final count: 272 whites, 184 white, 3 blacks, 502. Whenever I think about doing a talk or when I was working on a book and I would get stuck, I would sit down and read their names. And I just felt like I was speaking for the dead and how quickly and how sadly they all lost their lives that summer. So, orphans. There were orphans. They sent out, they being the town trustees, were the forerunners of the city council. They sent out a committee to find out how many children were living in homes with dead parents or had no parents anymore, and they found quite a few, quite a few. So I also say that to find out the names of all the deads, they sent out 4 people from the town trustees who went around and found out who all had died. So this was all done by citizens and people that were government on the city council. So Maria Cecil Gratz, who was married in 1819 to Benjamin Gratz, was the daughter of Nathaniel Gist and the great granddaughter or the granddaughter of Christopher Gist, who was a guide to the young George Washington. She lived in Canewood, Cobb County, but eventually she lived in a place that's now called Grants Park. At that time, and here's Benjamin, he's from Philadelphia. At that time, some children came to her, and they were the children of a person who worked for Mr. Gratz. He had a hemp mill, and they said they were starving, that their parents were dead, which they were. They were on the death list. Both were parents, both of the children's parents. The oldest one was a girl, and the youngest one was all the way down to a baby. And so Maria realized she had to do something about this, even though she was grieving because her mother died in her home. And she reached across the aisle. She was an Episcopalian, married to a Jewish man. And she knew if anything was going to happen, she was going to have to get these women together, all Protestants, but from different denominations. And they got together and they bought this house. They bought this house that had belonged to a doctor at Transylvania University, and they hired a teacher, free education for this kids, got a dairy cow, got it furnished, raised all this money, got it tax free, went to the state capitol. This is during this horrible summer. They did all this and formed an organization to take care of these children that exists today. The Lexington Orphan Society still donates money to different causes for children. The one thing they said that kept them solvent all this time, and they have a lot of money too, and they do all this underground. They don't do any fundraising, or well, not underground, but they don't do it publicly. They don't do any fundraising. It goes down from mother to daughter, sister to granddaughter, daughter-in-law. They said way back then, the treasurer must be a widow or a spinster, so her husband can't get our money, and that worked for them. It worked. You can find out more about Mariah Gist. Maria Gist. This is her descendant. His name is Maria Gist Gratz Roberts. She lives in Atlanta. She bought my book, and there's a whole story on YouTube that we filmed last year about this. And she talks about Christopher Gist also and other people that she knows. So that's on YouTube, and it's on my website, Terry Foodie. So what happened out of the epidemic? Well, Lexington became fallible. It no longer was prominent. The college ended by the Civil War. Cincinnati and Louisville have medical colleges, but there was rise in public health, privy laws, how big the privies and how sturdy they were supposed to be, and how many of them. Supposed to have some near the stables. Can't let the pigs run free anymore, even though some people say they ate the garbage, but they couldn't do that. And then this societal concern and care for the vulnerable with starting the orphanage. This was a play that I was involved with during the pandemic. I was the historical consultant to it, Limestone 1833, Limestone dot 1833, about Aunt Charlotte, King Solomon, and there's some things about the orphans also. It was on a YouTube on WKY, so the public radio, and you can find that. Just Google it and it'll come up, or you can find it on my website also. They did a good job. So what happened to cholera in the world? I'm looking at my time and I want to get to the questions. With John Snow, not the one from TV, but the real John Snow back then, he was an anesthesiologist, used to experiment with ether, attended Queen Victoria on two of her births, but he also was very interested in this cholera that happened in 1854. Unfortunately, he didn't live very long to be able to be recognized from his work. They didn't believe him. He was the one that did the whole thing with the Broad Street pump that you probably heard about. There were so many deaths that year, like 500 deaths in this short period of time. But the big thing that he did, he's almost sort of the father of public health, is that he went around epidemiology and found out where are you all getting your water from. Go up here, go there, it's all over the place, real gumshoe detective kind, and found out that many of these people that were dying got their water from this pump on Broad Street that might have gotten contaminated from a baby's diaper from somebody who was staying in that house, who brought it from some other place. And he documented all this. I actually have a copy of his book, and then a copy of this folds out of it. This folds out of it too, this map that shows where the water came from and show that the water in the sewers, this will really freak you out, that were in connection with each other in some ways. The pipes were so bad that they were leaking from the sewers into the regular drinking water pipes, plus the ships were dumping spillage in along the harbors. So this was another push of the problem is coming from the environment. The problem is coming from the water. It's not bad air. It's not miasma. It's coming from a contamination. And people that had money invested in these these pipes and waterworks, no, it's not. And they fought back against him. So how did things change? Why aren't people dying from cholera in countries where they have these kind of things? This is 1885 in Lexington, the first water pipes being laid, but it wasn't for drinking water. It was for fire protection with these wooden buildings. And people wanted to fight it because they didn't want to pay the tax. They didn't want to pay the tax. The only thing they had before this was, oh, excuse me, the only thing they had before this was wood. They had wood, and you had to have a certain number of buckets at your house, depending on how much your house was worth. You had to have more buckets if it was worth more. And any man who was like between 18 and 60 or 50 or whatever was supposed to line the brigade and carry the buckets unless he could pay a slave or somebody, or well, as the years went by, the slaves got free. If he could pay somebody to do it for him, he would, or he would hide. Otherwise, the buildings would burn. But this made a big difference because it also brought water to people for people to drink and cook with. But they still had the town branch overflowing, and it would get the water would get in the sewers. The drinking water still getting contaminated. So they used some of that progress money during the 1930s, and you probably got some African Americans in here, and you're Irish, and who knows what else, who else is down in there. But there was electricity, but they're down in here in the water with their boots. But this is what, in some places, is still like that. Just held together with some cement. But it was to try to keep the storm water and the drinking water separate. And we had problems with this overflowing in 2006. There's an EPA suit. This is still going on in some neighborhoods in Lexington. We're still doing things on the ground level, underneath the city streets, and then in different parts of the county with these huge retention tanks for water to try to keep this separate and also to not contaminate the groundwater. It doesn't get into the drinking water, but it can contaminate the ground. This shows where the town branch flows down Vine Street, and it's over here. You can actually hear the water running sometimes. This is an older picture because now we have a nice pathway through here for biking and walking, but that's only come in the last couple of years. You can cover it over with blacktop, but it's still there. It's still there. Let's say something about re repetitive patterns because that was one of the objectives. One of the things to know right up to today is that the disease is spread by human mobility with these things, with pilgrims, but also with people that are moved because of weather catastrophes, these fires. I think of the fires in California or here, but fires and floods throughout the world, and then populations that don't have money, poverty, they are living in something that's barely bigger than a tent. Denial is based on the reasons that I told you, the myths and fears, hinders personal cooperation. If you don't have personal cooperation, the whole community can suffer. Now, the Sanitary Conference in Paris in 1851 was something that the different countries got together and said, let's try to report it back and forth. And that has been going on probably every other decade or every decade or so, and evolved into the World Health Organization of the United Nations, 1948. So the World Health Organization came about because of countries trying to cooperate during the cholera epidemics of the 1800s. That's how old that organization is. We're sometimes having problems of emergence of old diseases, cholera, tuberculosis, new ones, SARS, Ebola, COVID-19, diseases with changes in the country. So here's some pictures from World Health Organization. That's an older picture. But you still have people washing clothes and getting drinking water from the same place. You still have some pictures on the World Health Organization's website of people getting drinking water out of streams that got plastic, old clothes, and garbage in it. It's like, oh my gosh, they still don't have all the access that we have. This was a cooperation of doctors. I actually met one of the Dr. Sachs at Chautauqua from Johns Hopkins University, and he really gave me a lot of encouragement to keep doing this work and get the book finished and all this. But the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization spent money in Egypt and places like that to help the military prevent them from getting cholera. The U.S. was interested in this too, and they discovered ways that with a perfect formula to replace the fluids that had the fluid and electrolytes that they needed. But when there's war, sanitary sanitary pipes get blown up and people get cholera and children get cholera. And they have to go a long way to get treatment. And then they have governments that deny there's a problem and there's a high death toll, and they get affected by this. So where the World Health Organization is right now, and I just got this slide off their site, is that they are doing the surveillance. They're looking for community response right there at the local level, and they are coming to the communities with the tents and the treatments so they can nip it in the bud and get these people replacement fluids, replacement IVs if they need them. They can give them a vaccine to have less symptoms, and it also prevents reinfection. But you've got to have cooperation. If you have cooperation on the local level, you can do so much on the national level. I think we saw that in COVID, but they have cooperation on. I can't believe these people are carrying this tent, but they are. And there was another picture that they had of a place where there's pumps and these girls get the water in the pumps, and there was a doctor there getting a specimen because they do surveillance on the water sources to make sure that they don't have cholera in their water sources and their drinking water. So where's our lessons for our global health today? I think we're almost a quarter off. International authority with local community, that what I just said with that last slide, in prevention, surveillance, and treatment. At the national places like the World Health Organization has the authority to go into a country if the cholera breaks out. Personal cooperation affects pandemics. You see that with years ago with polio, we saw that with COVID. What we do on the personal level affects everybody in the community. Transparency in the media and the government. Don't lie. Don't say that it's not there. Don't pretend that it's in denial. Go after it and get it contained with accurate data. Survive or die, we've learned that where you live and who's in charge can have an effect on whether you survive or die in an epidemic. It can happen here, it can happen to me. So these are photo Richie Wireman took of the town branch out in the countryside near Masterson Station. The water can be a source of disease, or it can be a source of bringing our community together, which is how we have to look at our health. And it flows, it's always flowing. Just as our blood's always flowing through us, the water's always flowing through our environment. So Solomon's grave, I'm going to end with Solomon's grave because when James Lane Allen wrote about him, he talked about this person who had the bravery to get down in the grave that he was digging with the person whose life was gone. And it said, for had he not a royal heart, anybody can be a hero. They can be homeless. We don't even look at those people. Someone said that to me, Terry, he was homeless. We don't even look at those people. But I can tell you that somebody is putting flowers on his grave year round. Almost every day, there are flowers on his grave. And he's been dead since 1854. So we've got some time for questions. Here's my information. My book is available from my website. You can find an order form there, and if you send me a check, I will mail it to you. I'll cover the postage. I have a new on Amazon. Right now, they're re-certifying me, rechecking me out, and send them a picture of my driver's license again. So you might have to wait a day or two for my store to pop up again, even though I just sold a book with them. It's down that bit. And for me, if someone says, why do you do this? Partially because of my background in public health, but also I'm so touched by these three people, these three heroes, and other people in the story. And I feel honored to tell their story and to keep what happened to these folks that summer in in our memory and in our awareness as we deal with our own health, and also to encourage you to look up from that side I told you, look up the list of the deaths and to see those names. And those people will become real to you too, to you also. Thank you. Okay, I'm ready. What do we do now?
Okay, well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for a really fascinating presentation. And I know that Melissa has a question to start us off, and then we have some other ones as well. And folks, if you have questions and you want to put them in the chat, this is the time to do that. And we'll get to as many as we can.
Okay. Okay, do
Terry,
tell me that it's awesome. I'll be
go
quiet.
ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. What was your
Well,
question?
is this where we see it? We all see each other, or do we still stay like this?
Yeah, you'll have to back out of your presentation and share.
Oh, well, let's just keep going and see how we're
Okay.
doing.
I just want to thank you as well because I work in an archives. I'm an archivist. I work at the Interior in Tennessee, and so I have been a genealogist for many years, and I'm all about the stories that everyone that's walked on the face of this earth has a story to tell. And so thank you for that. My question is, during your research, were you able to access any diaries or old letters that maybe people talked about the pandemic and day-to-day life?
Yes, her question was, well, you all heard her question. I heard it in my ear. There's actually one, I don't know where it is right now, but I was using it for a little while. Someone gave it to me, and what it was, okay, let me think about this for a second. I don't want to get this wrong. The mother died, and the father was a minister. I can't tell you exactly who it was, but this was sent to me from a person who like was up here for the Bluegrass Trust, but she lived in another state. But when you read it, okay, so mother is on the couch and she is deteriorating, and father wants to bring the children up to say goodbye to her. And what the daughter wrote in her diary, the oldest child was a girl, and she wrote this in her diary years later, said, we almost recoiled from her because she was so much like a dead person.
Hmm.
Because she
Wow.
looked, she didn't use the word dead person, but she looked as if she had already passed over.
Hmm.
And and they were afraid of her.
I
You know,
bet.
they were
I
just
bet.
little kids. Yeah. Yeah. And she also said that vision was upsetting to the children, but also father collapsing on the floor in grief and probably
Wow.
crying like, what am I going to do? My wife is dying and I have all these children and who's going to take care of them and blah, blah, blah. And grief and helplessness. So it was a description from this child who was the oldest child of what it was like to be in that home when this happened.
Wow. Thank you for telling us that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know
So
it was wow. Wow. Yeah.
the first question I have in the chat here actually ties back to a conversation that we were having shortly before we went on air, which is that my third great grandmother died of the cholera epidemic in 1833, and she was not in Lexington. She was in Bardstown. So the question is, were the smaller rural towns around Lexington spared? And I think it might also have something to do with the karst layer that you were describing. So can you describe a little bit about like where else outside of Lexington it went, and if there was any commonalities in those places where it did go or it didn't go?
I'm not an expert on this because I focused mostly on the 1833. However, in 1854 or something, it was a horrible epidemic around Lebanon County Fair, the Marion County Fair. And I found writings about that and have shared it. They had outhouses that were over the river. Like you would walk out on the dock and use the outhouse or it would fall down into the river. So they
Oh,
had that sort of thing. Oh yeah, oh yeah. You don't want to catch any frogs there, do you? Or something. So, and that was when they came to the fair. Okay, we'll just go on out there on the dock, and just poop there. And then they had different water wells for the blacks and the whites. And there was a true story about this black man who was walking home. Of course, he probably walked very far, and a rainstorm came up, and he asked this man if I could go into his barn, and the man said, "No, you're a black man, you can't go in the barn." So he died out in the field in the rain by himself from the cholera, and he couldn't even get into shelter. That was the story. But as far as the other small towns, and also that when Grant was president, he had all his army guys, because he had been in the army, right? He had all his army guys report back to him about different parts of Kentucky and what was going on with different choleras at that time. And that book is in Transylvania University's library. I checked it out. It's like 1,000 pages. I read through all of it, made all these notes, and saw how they were starting to see patterns. And they were starting to think it might be in the water. And you would see more if there was all these boys at a boys' school someplace and they are using the same pump. Then you'd see some there. And what he thought, and I was fascinated by this. It's got all these maps and stuff in it, and that thing about Bar, Lebanon is in there too. But when I took it back to Transy, they said, "You're not supposed to check this out." And I said, "Well, I didn't know. You let me take it." But that is there. Um, as far as the Bardstown, people ran away from Lexington. A lot of them went to Keene, but if they knew somebody up that way, they could have gone up there for a while. People would run away if they had transportation, someplace to stay, money to get a room, and if it was already in their body, they could have gotten it into somebody else's chamber pot. Let's put it that way. How about this?
mhm.
Something in the middle of the night, and whoever's emptying that doesn't get it all off their hands, and then they're preparing food. Can you see how this could happen? They're preparing
Yeah.
food with it on their hands. If they have emptied a full chamber pot, that nobody's going to eat breakfast after you hear this talk, but but you've all changed diapers, or a lot of us have changed. Anybody who's babysat or had a baby, and I've changed enough diapers. You know that you have to really scrub, especially if you've got fingernails. And if
Yes.
you're in a hurry at some home because you're supposed to be changing the beds or get breakfast on, I think that's how it could travel. And that could
Sure.
have been how it got to Bardstown from somebody coming from another town. I'm sure it came from another town. Or from
Sure. And that
Louisville.
would
People running away from Louisville.
right. And that would certainly confound any pattern recognition that you might be able to do as well if people are sort of traveling around with it. Like it would be harder to isolate it to a particular water source if people are traveling with it. So that just makes the epidemiologist's job even harder, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And they didn't know it was from water. That wasn't common because this was 1833 and the stuff with John Snow was 20 years later, and that was in England, and they still didn't believe him. It's a miasma was considered the bad thing. And I would say I've got a talk that I did that's on my website long before I knew I was going to write a book. I put on my Niagara cap and pretended to be a nurse from that time, even though I'm not in the right outfit. And we had this thing called Dinner with the Dead in the Episcopal Burial Ground. And I got filmed. I didn't know I was being filmed, but as I was talking, I said, they actually believe it came across the Atlantic. That must have been really bad in my eyes, but in a strong wind or something like that, that they would think in the air all the way over the Atlantic. But you know, with SARS, when that first happened, the first deaths were in Hong Kong, I think, and Germany. I think it was Germany, but it had to do with people that could get on planes that had money. It was something to do with the banking industry. So it was these big and always like with SARS, people who die are healthcare professionals who are treating them who don't know it's contagious. Oh, end of slideshow. Okay. I'm done talking about that one.
So actually, that's a perfect segue into another. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I can now. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I
So we have
can't hear
another
you.
question that's actually a perfect segue here, which is how do you find information? How do you find information on the around the country? Like if somebody is looking at various outbreaks of cholera, smallpox, etc., or either just where did they happen at various times, or looking for a specific one? Like where do you find information on these things?
Well, you used to be able to find it on the CDC reports, and I'm not sure what they're doing. There's something called the MMR, which is a report that would come out every week that would tell you what was going on and where it was going on. I think you could still look at CDC and see if they're putting any of that out. Oh, I used to see that when I was at the health department. It was MMWR, something like that. Mortality was one of them. Weekly report. So it might have been morbidity and mortality because even though morbidity and mortality weekly report was, I think it's MMWR, would have those statistics. Who doesn't do it as much? Okay, all right, what's next?
No. That's actually really helpful. Another question that we have about it's a little story and then a question. A few years ago, I attended the Louisville Water Company tour that gave the history of trying to bring clean drinking water to the city. Citizens did not want to pay for water. And the question is, when was the earliest time that drinking water was treated for cholera?
Okay, I don't know about Louisville, but however, I believe it was in 2019 I was that I was invited to set up a little talk at the town branch wastewater treatment plant, which I've also done a research project on the stormwater stuff, stormwater stuff. And they were celebrating 100 years of that treatment plant. Now, so the question is so much, are we treating water for cholera? Are we surveilling our sanitary sewer stuff for diseases? Because you know how we track COVID now? They're checking it in the sewer stuff, those treatment plants. They have people working in laboratories 24 hours a day, every day of the year, even Christmas. They wear lab coats. They've got all these microscopes and stuff, and they are in there checking samples of everything that gets treated in a wastewater treatment plant to see if there's any kind of bacteria like that are coming through our poop. And Louisville's got to have something like that. Chautauqua has something like that. I toured it. And they said, you're the only person who's come here as a guest, or as a tour, who wanted to see the treatment plant. But we, what we do to our drinking water is we just kind of do, as far as I know, general purification things. Do they trade it at that end of the drinking water? I think they probably, or do they test it? That's what I'm wondering. Yeah, I think they probably do. It would be very rare, very almost impossible to get it in the drinking water now. It would be really hard. There have been cases. Okay, I'll stop. It's almost 8 o'clock. What do we need to do now? It's 8:02.
Now, I actually want to wrap up with one more question, and then that's, I think, a perfect stopping point, which is, was there any folk wisdom about treating or preventing cholera that turned out to actually be right? Right, because a lot of times, they, as you mentioned, they treated people with mercury, which is a super bad idea, and just for anything. And lots of people thought it was from lots of places that were wrong as well. But did anybody get it right? Like, did anybody know,
I would,
oh, I should really be boiling my water?
I think no, no, there wasn't that, but there was concern about vegetables. That don't eat, watch your vegetables because if vegetables were getting contaminated. We've had problems here with E. coli, with on lettuce and stuff like that because of what's been in. Actually, so there was talk about making sure that the vegetables are staying away from vegetables if you've got that problem. If somebody seems to be having diarrhea or whatever in the household, don't eat the vegetables. It may be dirty. And not to get cold during the winter, just that general thing. But thinking of the contaminations that we've had with E. coli and some other Shigella and things like that, with places where they're using piping that's probably not the best, and that's something for it there. Yeah. But as far as the water, it's just taken a while for people to realize that. However, at the same time, there were people, like I said, O'Shaughnessy, the Irishman, who were giving people intravenous to try to put it back. And the only reason it didn't work is because they didn't know the electrolyte formula. They could get them better for a while, but then they'd relapse and probably die. So they were onto it. They were onto it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for this. I mean, it was totally interesting to me on a personal level, as I mentioned, but also from a public health level, like this is incredibly interesting and important for us all to know because we've all lived through an epidemic, a pandemic recently, but it's kind
Thank
of
you.
it's illustrative to understand that we're not the first and probably not the last either, but to just understand how this big historic event really affected so many people and created different institutions, that was just fascinating. So we really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you, Terry. We appreciate you spending your evening with us and sharing your talk with us, your passion. Um, let me remind everyone that our next webinar will be Tuesday, February the 17th at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, when Cynthia Meharry will be with us to present Freedom Suits in the British Colony of Virginia, Court Cases and Subsequent Laws that Shaped the Beginning of African American Slavery in the Early 17th Century. If you were not able to attend Monday's night's Meet the Board, the video is now up in the Learning Library on the website. You get to it by going to What We Do. Make sure you sign on as a member before you go and try to watch it. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Blue Sky. We have links at the bottom of our homepage of our website, and we hope to see you all in February. And with that, we will say goodnight.
Good night.
Night. Now I can see you. Thank you.